The fluorescent lights in the First National Bank of Cedar Falls flickered ominously as I pressed my back against the cold marble pillar, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. At 73, I thought my days of adrenaline rushes were behind me, relegated to the occasional close call while parallel parking my ancient Honda Civic. How wrong I was. Nobody move. The voice cracked through the air like a whip, young and desperate. This is a robbery. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I clutched my worn leather purse tighter, the same one I'd carried for 15 years, and peered around the pillar. 3 figures in black hoodies and cheap Halloween masks stood near the teller windows, a vampire, a werewolf, and what looked like a zombie with half its rubber face peeling off. The zombie held what appeared to be a gun, though from my angle, I couldn't be certain it wasn't a toy. Kids these days, I thought, adjusting my bifocals. Even their bank robberies lack professionalism. The vampire, clearly the leader based on his aggressive posturing, shoved a canvas bag toward the nearest teller. Fill it up, small bills. And don't even think about hitting that alarm. But it was the werewolf that caught my attention. He wasn't focused on the money or the terrified customers huddled on the floor. Instead, he was fumbling with something. Near the main entrance, a small rectangular device with colorful wires protruding from it like electronic spaghetti. Even from 20 feet away, I recognized the telltale signs, the hastily soldered connections, the digital timer displaying red numbers, the small cylinder that could only be a detonator. Oh, for heaven's sake, I thought. They've brought a bomb. Margaret, get down, hissed Mrs. Chun from behind the information desk, her voice barely above a whisper. What are you doing just standing there? But I couldn't move, couldn't look away. The werewolf's hands shook as he tried to attach the device to the doorframe, and I could see immediately that he had no idea what he was doing. The wiring was all wrong: red connected to blue, yellow twisted around green in a way that would either cause a premature detonation or, more likely, prevent the device from working at all. Amateur hour, I mused, remembering another time, another place when lives hung in the balance and steady hands made all the difference. Timers set for 10 minutes. The werewolf called to his companions, his voice muffled by the mask. Nobody gets out till we're gone. 10 minutes. I watched the red digits begin their countdown. 9:59, 9:58. 9:57. The vampire was growing, increasingly agitated with the teller, who fumbled with the cash drawer with trembling fingers. Faster, we don't have all day. That's when I noticed the real problem. The werewolf had connected the timer to the wrong circuit. Instead of the standard 10-minute countdown they'd programmed, the device would actually detonate in roughly 90 seconds due to a feedback loop in the wiring. These boys had accidentally created a death trap for everyone in the bank, including themselves. I thought of my late husband Harold, who used to joke that I was the only woman he knew who read Demolition Quarterly for fun. Most wives complain about their husband's hobbies. He'd say with that crooked smile I'd fallen in love with 52 years ago. Mine complains that I don't understand the finer points of shaped charges. If only he could see me now, taking a deep breath that tasted of fear and floor wax, I stepped out from behind the pillar. Excuse me, young man, I called out in my most polite grandmother voice, the same tone I used to ask the grocery clerk about marked down produce. The vampire whipped around, his plastic fangs catching the light. I said nobody moves. Oh, I know, dear, and I don't mean to be a bother, I continued, walking slowly toward the werewolf at the door, but you've got a problem with your explosive device. The bank fell silent, except for the steady tick of the antique clock on the wall and the soft whimper of a customer hiding behind a potted plant. Even the teller stopped counting money. What did you just say? The vampire's voice cracked slightly. Your bomb, sweetie. The wiring is all wrong. At the rate it's actually configured, you've got about, I paused to check my watch, a simple Timex that Harold had given me for our 10th anniversary, 70 seconds before it goes off, not 10 minutes. The werewolf stopped his fumbling and stared at me through the mask's eye holes. You're lying. I'm really not, I said, setting my purse down on a nearby chair and reaching into it. Now I just need to grab my reading glasses and maybe my little toolkit. Toolkit? The zombie's voice pitched higher. Oh yes, I always carry one. Harold used to tease me about it, but you never know when you might need to fix a loose screw or, well, disarm an improvised explosive device. The vampire let out a bark of laughter that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. This old bat thinks she's a bomb expert. Lady, sit down before you hurt yourself. His companions joined in the laughter, but I noticed the werewolf's eyes darting between the device and the timer on his wrist. He was doing the math, realizing something wasn't adding up. Ma'am, said Officer Rodriguez, one of the bank's security guards who'd been forced to the floor at gunpoint. Please don't. Don't what? Don't try to save all our lives? I pulled my reading glasses from their case and perched them on my nose, because that's what this is about now. Your friends here have accidentally wired this device to detonate in. Another glance at my watch, about 50 seconds. The laughter died. She's bluffing, the vampire said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. The red wire is connected to the blue terminal, I continued, opening my small leather toolkit and selecting a pair of needle-nose pliers. That creates a feedback loop through the timer circuit. Basic mistake, really. I've seen it a dozen times. Where exactly have you seen it a dozen times? The werewolf's voice was barely above a whisper. I looked up from the device, meeting his eyes through the mask. Vietnam, 1968 to 1971. Explosive Ordnance Disposal, 173rd Airborne Brigade. Staff Sergeant Margaret Ann Kowalski, retired. The bank fell silent again, except for the tick-tick of my watch and the soft hum of the fluorescent lights. You're lying, the vampire repeated, but his voice lacked conviction. 42 seconds, I said calmly, studying the device more closely. And no, I'm not lying. Harold and I met at Firebase Alpha. He was a medic, I was EOD. Spent 3 years disarming everything from simple tripwires to complex-shaped charges. This little thing you've put together? It's actually not too different from the improvised devices we dealt with back then, just with modern electronics. My hands moved with practiced precision, identifying the correct wires and tracing the circuits. The muscle memory was still there after all these years, the steady breathing, the focused concentration, the ability to block out everything except the task at hand. 35 seconds, I murmured. Now the tricky part is that you've created what we used to call a dead man switches situation. If I cut the wrong wire, we'll have an immediate detonation instead of waiting for the timer. Oh God, whispered Mrs. Chun. Oh God, oh God, oh God. It's all right, dear, I called over my shoulder. This is actually a relatively simple fix. The yellow wire is the one carrying the timer signal, but they've routed it through the blue terminal instead of the green one. I just need to stop. The werewolf lunged forward, pulling off his mask to reveal a face that couldn't have been older than 25. Acne scars dotted his pale cheeks, and his eyes were wide with terror. Stop, you'll kill us all. 28 seconds, sweetheart. And if I don't do something, we're all dead anyway. I carefully positioned the pliers around the yellow wire. Unless you'd prefer to spend the last half-minute of your life running for the exit? Though I should mention, the blast radius of this device would take out most of the building. The vampire pulled off his mask too, revealing another young face. This one streaming with sweat. Jesus, Tommy, what did you do? I followed the instructions. Tommy the werewolf was on the verge of panic. I followed them exactly. Where did you get the instructions? I asked, still studying the wiring. YouTube? How did you know? Because this is exactly the kind of mistake someone makes when they follow a video tutorial without understanding the underlying principles. I selected a different tool from my kit, a small wire stripper that Harold had bought me for our 30th anniversary. 20 seconds. The zombie finally pulled off his mask, revealing a teenager who couldn't have been more than 18. Maybe. We should listen to her. Listen to her? She's a grandma. But the vampire's protest sounded hollow. A grandma who spent 3 years in a combat zone disarming explosives. I corrected, carefully stripping a small section of insulation from a green wire. Harold used to joke that I was the only person he knew who could knit a scarf and disarm a booby trap in the same afternoon. 15 seconds. Someone whispered. I think it was Officer Rodriguez. Almost there, I murmured, connecting the green wire to what should have been its proper terminal. The timer circuit is now isolated from the detonation circuit, but I still need to. 10 seconds. My hands moved with the precision born of experience and desperation. Strip the insulation. Twist the wires together. Tuck them safely away from the detonator. 5. The red numbers on the timer continued their inexorable countdown. 004, 003, 002. 001. The timer hit. 0. Nothing happened. The silence stretched for heartbeats before someone let out a shaky breath. Then another. Then Mrs. Chun started crying with relief. Holy shit, whispered Tommy. Holy actual shit, you did it. Language, young man, I said automatically, closing my toolkit and slipping it back into my purse. And yes, I did it. Though, I have to say, that was some of the sloppiest wiring I've seen since Private Henderson tried to rig a fishing explosive in the Mekong Delta. The 3 would-be bank robbers stood frozen, staring at the now harmless device and the elderly woman, who had just saved their lives. So what happens now? Asked the teenager who'd been wearing the zombie mask. Officer Rodriguez was already on his radio, calling for backup. Now you put your hands behind your heads and lie down on the floor, and you thank Mrs. I'm sorry. What was your name again? Kowalski, Margaret Kowalski. But everyone just calls me Grandma Maggie. You thank Grandma Maggie for saving your lives. Rodriguez finished as the 3 young men complied. Lying down on the polished marble floor, the vampire who'd introduced himself as Kevin during the surrender process looked up at me with something like awe. How did you know? I mean, how did you know just by looking at it? I thought about Harold again, about the nights we'd spent on base discussing the finer points of explosive devices over lukewarm coffee and stale donuts, about the terrifying thrill of approaching an unknown device, knowing that one wrong move could be your last, about coming home to a country that didn't want to hear war stories from women, especially not stories about the technical aspects of destroying things. Experience, I said finally, and the fact that people tend to underestimate what they don't understand. The sirens were getting closer now, their wail cutting through the afternoon air. Soon the bank would be full of police officers and FBI agents and reporters, all wanting to know how a 73-year-old retired bookkeeper had managed to disarm a bomb. But for now, in this moment of strange calm after the storm, I sat down in one of the customer chairs and thought about Harold, about how proud he would have been, about how he'd always said that the most dangerous person in any room was the one everyone underestimated. Tommy, still lying on the floor, turned his head to look at me. Why didn't you just run? You could have gotten out when we first came in. I adjusted my bifocals and smoothed down my gray cardigan. Because running away doesn't solve anything, dear. And because someone had to take responsibility for fixing what you'd broken, but you could have died. Yes, I agreed. I could have. But I've been dying slowly for the past 3 years anyway, ever since Harold passed. At least this way, if something had gone wrong, I'd have gone out doing something that mattered. The FBI arrived first, followed closely by the bomb squad. They set up a perimeter and began the careful process of documenting the scene and removing the device. Agent Sarah Martinez, a serious-looking woman in her 40s, approached me with a combination of respect and disbelief. "Mrs. Kowalski, I need to ask you some questions about what happened here." "Of course, dear. Though I should mention, I probably need to call my daughter. She's expecting me for dinner, and I'm going to be late." Agent Martinez blinked. "Ma'am, you just disarmed an explosive device. Doesn't that you feel relieved?" I said simply. "And a little hungry. All this excitement has given me quite an appetite." Over the next hour, I answered questions and provided a detailed technical explanation of what I'd done to neutralize the device. The bomb squad confirmed my assessment. The device had indeed been wired incorrectly and would have detonated within minutes if left untouched. "You saved at least 30 lives today," Agent Martinez told me as the paramedics checked my blood pressure. "The building structure might not have contained the blast." "Just doing what needed to be done," I replied. "Harold always said that. Expertise is only valuable if you're willing to use it when it matters." The 3 young men were led away in handcuffs, but not before each of them stopped to thank me. Kevin, the vampire, had tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry we laughed at you," he said. "I'm sorry we didn't listen." "Apology accepted," I told him. "And Kevin? When you get out of prison, consider taking some real electronics classes. You've got steady hands, you just need proper instruction." As the crowd began to disperse and the bank employees started the process of cleaning up, I found myself alone with Officer Rodriguez and Mrs. Chun. "Grandma Maggie," Rodriguez said, shaking his head in amazement, "where did you learn to stay so calm under pressure?" I thought about firebase mornings when incoming mortar were as regular as breakfast. About the weight of responsibility when other people's lives depended on your steady hands and clear thinking. About Harold holding me while I cried after particularly difficult days, whispering that being strong didn't mean never being afraid. It meant being afraid and doing what needed to be done anyway. "You learn," I said quietly, "when you have to." Mrs. Chun, who managed the bank's customer service desk, had been watching me with curious eyes throughout the afternoon. "Margaret, I've worked with you on your banking for 10 years. How did I not know you were in the military?" "You never asked," I said with a small smile. "And most people aren't interested in war stories from old ladies. They want to hear about grandchildren and garden clubs, not explosive ordnance disposal. But you saved our lives. Today I did. Most days I just water my tomatoes and complain about the neighbor's dog." As I finally gathered my purse and prepared to leave, Agent Martinez approached one more time. "Mrs. Kowalski, would you consider consulting for us? We could use someone with your expertise, especially for training purposes." I paused, thinking about my quiet retirement, my small house with the garden Harold had planned but never gotten to plant, the days that stretched ahead with no real purpose except staying alive. "You know what?" I said, surprising myself. "I think Harold would like that idea." 3 months later, I found myself standing in front of a classroom full of young FBI agents and bomb squad technicians, explaining the finer points of improvised explosive devices. On my desk sat a framed photo of Harold in his army dress uniform, next to my old toolkit and a small sign that read, "Staff Sergeant Margaret Kowalski, EOD retired, but not forgotten." The students listened intently as I demonstrated proper wire identification and circuit tracing, occasionally asking questions that reminded me of Harold's curious nature. At the end of each class, I would tell them the same thing I'd learned that day in the bank. The most dangerous assumptions we make are about who can and cannot rise to meet a crisis. Age, appearance, background, none of that matters when lives are on the line. What matters is knowledge, courage, and the willingness to act when action is needed. One student, a young woman who reminded me of myself at that age, raised her hand. "But how do you overcome the fear? When everyone's counting on you and you could make a mistake. I looked at Harold's photo and smiled. You remember that fear. Keeps you careful, but it shouldn't keep you from doing what's right. And you remember that someone has to take responsibility for fixing what's broken, especially if no one expects it to be you. The bank eventually reopened, with a small plaque near the entrance commemorating the heroic actions of staff, Sergeant Margaret Kowalski, Ret, and the importance of never underestimating the courage and capability of our fellow citizens. Kevin, Tommy, and Jake, the three would-be robbers, all received reduced sentences in exchange for cooperation and community service. Jake, the youngest, wrote me a letter from prison saying he'd enrolled in electronics courses and wanted to pursue a career in legitimate security systems. As for me, I discovered that retirement didn't have to mean irrelevance. My consulting work with the FBI led to a part-time teaching position at the local community college, where I developed a course called Crisis Management for Civilians. I also started volunteering with veterans organizations, finally ready to share stories I'd kept locked away for decades. Sometimes, late at night in the house that Harold and I had shared, I would think about that afternoon in the bank. About the moment when everything could have gone wrong but didn't. About the laughter that died when knowledge trumped assumptions. About the reminder that we all carry stories within us that others can't see, stories of courage, skill, love, and loss. The most beautiful part of being underestimated, I realized, is the opportunity to exceed expectations in ways that matter. Not for glory or recognition, but for the simple reason that someone needs to step forward when the moment demands it. And in a world that, too, often dismisses the contributions of those who don't fit expected molds, sometimes the most powerful statement we can make is this: don't assume you know what I'm capable of. Harold would have loved that lesson almost as much as he'd have loved seeing his quiet bookkeeper wife save the day with nothing more than steady hands, clear thinking, and a lifetime of underestimated expertise. After all, the most dangerous person in any room might just be the grandmother everyone ignores, the one with the gentle smile, the sensible shoes, and the toolkit full of knowledge waiting for its moment to shine.